Hello, hope you're doing well. I'd like to invite you to another video. I'm doing this one in Zoom, so I'm going to try to one take this, which means that almost dooms me right from the start. But anyways, I hope you're doing well. This is the remix. Uh, I don't know. I thought that was cool when I was doing it, but basically this is going to be a lot like the first assignment and with a different focus. Like the first assignment in the sense of like format and what I'm asking you to do. And this idea of me giving you a bunch of potential topics and like the Giants of Psychology where you picked one and then did a deep dive on it. In this one, you're going to take a key idea from psychology. Okay, so one of these key psychological concepts and do sort of the same idea. So just to like jump ahead for a sec before I get into them, you're going to see that I'm going to give those same options as before. That's like literally cut and paste from the first assignment, just the idea of like option one, option two, and option three. Okay, so just to look at the questions and then I'll take like a second going through the different options. What is the psychological concept? So, right, say if you take like an option like confirmation bias, tell me about what confirmation bias is. A little bit of boiling hot coffee out of my lower C chord mug. Yeah, so tell me what confirmation bias is. Make an argument to me that the psychological concept is something that is still valuable in modern times and to like a modern student, like understanding something like confirmation bias, which is just the example I'm using, but one of the options. What does that idea have to contribute to society and how can it help us understand human psychology and how does that teaching help us understand our own life? So I think like if you're breaking this into a paper, it would probably make sense to answer those in sort of that kind of order. One thing you'll learn about me is if you decide to answer in a different way and veer a little bit off from the questions, but still do a good job, I'll still give like a strong mark for that. So some people will sort of combine 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 or whatever. And that's okay. I just want you really focusing on this idea of like, what's the essence of the concept? Why should people care about it? And I use that approach to asking questions quite a lot because I think it puts students in an interesting perspective, in an interesting orientation to respond, right? Because it's to, I'm basically asking to sell me on the idea. Pick one of those ideas, learn about it, try to tell me what it has that has value, show me how it right, so you're going to probably start off with describing the concept, talking about who came up with this concept, the situation and context around how it developed, how it's used to look at certain things. I think you'll see the two-factor model is another example up there, which is like was huge in developing this concept called G intelligence, or like really big in psychometrics, measuring psychological variables like intelligence. Okay, so some of those questions, all I'm saying is I'm going to be flexible in how I look at how you answer those, right? Because I want to allow flexibility for you depending on all the people are going to push you in slightly different directions, right? Like if you're focusing on the Good Samaritan experiment or you're focusing on a confirmation bias, it might lead you to answer those questions a little bit differently in what you focus on and stuff like that. Okay, so some of these ideas, like I won't totally explain all these because what I tried to do with these is give you interesting concepts related to psychology and developmental psychology and psychology somewhat more broadly, but I tried to pick ones that have direct kind of relevance to what we've been looking at, but that are a bit outside the realms of the regular course, right? So you've learned a bit about confirmation bias, or just this idea of how like our mind, it's very attractive to our mind to see examples that confirm things that we believe. And we have hidden and especially unconscious motivations to push back more against things that challenge our model. Whereas we have a bias towards things that confirm our model, right? Which is a quick way of trying to explain confirmation bias. But I want you to go deeper than that and explain where that idea comes from and how it sits within cognitive psychology and how it's really about, how we handle new information. We have a bias towards information that confirms and talk about the psychology of that. Right. Or maybe you're going to talk about the elaboration likelihood model. Okay. And what that means is that like the elaboration likelihood model, think about this. It's kind of interesting. It's this idea of it comes from kind of marketing psychology or if I'm trying to sell you on an idea, it's really important that I understand how much you're likelihood, the likelihood that you think deeply about it, that you have elaborate, deep thoughts about it. It's like, okay, say I'm trying to convince you. I should have thought of like examples in advance, but say I'm trying to sell snowmobiles, right? And snowmobiles are a kind of specific audience, right? So those are kind of aimed towards a lot of people that have an above average, let's say, understanding of things like mechanics. So if I'm a snowmobile salesman, I might want to advertise the size of the engine and like the power and the torque and all these things, right? That the average consumer wouldn't care about. We've known for a long time with marketing psychology, like don't sell people on the size of the engine, get them to be able to picture themselves in the car, right? You sell the experience, because this is the other, but okay, so that's the idea. So say with that very specific target audience, just to go back to my example of people you're trying to sell a snowmobile to, maybe the likelihood that they're going to care about that level of elaboration about the engine mechanics is actually pretty high. So that actually makes sense to do that. If you're trying to sell me on a cheeseburger, though, don't sell me on a huge background about all the ingredients. It's like just show me a picture of a nice grilled patty with melted cheese on it, and it's like this idea that, and I didn't do a great job explaining the elaboration likelihood model, which means just people, depending on the situation and depending on who the person is, are more or less likelihood to elaborate and think deeply about something, right? So why does that matter? Well, it matters because if I know you're only going to look at something surface level, then I should aim my prime, or how I'm trying to influence you if we're talking about marketing, at a very surface level. You're going to be more influenced by color and flashiness and positioning and all this stuff. But if you're going to be elaborating and looking deeper, so this ELK model is to look at this idea of how to aim marketing at the level of processing of the potential consumer. That's a decent way to say it after that huge ramble. Motor cognition is, I want to leave that kind of broad, and you can take it however you want. You can talk about eye-hand coordination. You can look at this, because what's that really mean, right? What's it mean to say that like this ball goes up in the air and I just look at it in my hand like, okay, because since I'm sitting at this awkward angle at my desk, I threw it straight up. So I didn't do a normal catch. My hand like automatically did this like awkward, like straight up catch, right? But I didn't have to think to myself, oh, before I'm going to do like that my eye saw it and my hand did it. It's like, well, he's called, oh, that's eye hand. It's like, okay, great. So you gave a name to it. That's not explaining it. That's super complicated from a neuroanatomy perspective. Joint attention, this idea that I think I touched on in the last assignment, but that the child's mind and the child's ability to get smarter is deeply connected to the child's ability to pay attention, but not just pay attention. So you see how that word has the term attention, and then it also has the word joint, which means combined, right? That you can not only pay attention, but you can pay attention with someone else on the same thing. And once you can pay attention to me talking, basically, then I can teach you. Once my daughter can look at the same page as me and we can both be focusing on it, I can teach her to read. Yeah, which is a current major focus, right? You teach your kid how to read. I won't go on a huge rant about that, but reading is difficult until you get fluent, right? And once you get fluent at reading and you just look at the word and you automatically read it, which is what fluent means, then reading gets a lot more fun for kids. And if you can teach kids to read well, it improves their ability at almost every subject, right? Because if you think about it, except maybe like math or French or gym, it's like almost every other class that's written, right? Whether it's like history or geography or English or whatever, when you go to university, psychology, all your child and family studies courses, it's like all those courses you're going to do better, and if you can write better, right? And you're going to write better if you can read better, because reading is just looking at other people's good writing. You guys are like, thanks, Mike, we're in second year of university, thanks for explaining what reading is. But okay, anyways, recency effect. This is from Mary Wittenchalk, and this idea of like I could do a really good full presentation and then have a bad ending. And that bad ending, it's like the kind of common old saying of like leaves a bad taste in your mouth. It's like even if the thing tastes good, it left the bad taste in your mouth. That's a good way of actually explaining recency effect. The most recent thing, recency, the most recent thing has more effect than like the middle of the performance. Yeah, what does recency effect mean? What does introspection mean? Another dynamite word. So this is Wilhelm Wonton. You'd have to tell me a little bit in that answer, probably who he is and how he fits into the story, and an interesting character, and what's introspection, right? Like you can see what an inspection is like when you're what's Inspector Gadget, like a detective introspection to turn that investigation inwards. Automaticity, or whatever. What a weird word, automaticity. Yeah, I think I did spell that right. It's just a weird way to write. It means obviously automatic, but I should have like, this is dead space. That would be awesome if I could just cut out that last 30 seconds, but whatever. I'll leave it in. None of us are perfect. But it threw me off because it doesn't look like a real word, but it is. And you can obviously see the word automatic there, right? That like, what does it mean for something to become automatic? And I wanted, if you answer this question, for you to play around with this idea of like, well, you say like, okay, once you learn how to drive, it just becomes like automatic. It's like getting on a bike, and going on a bike is just automatic. What's that mean? What's that process of becoming automatic, automaticity or whatever? It's like a weird word, but you can just look at it as automatic. Identity formation and individuation, right? So now you're looking at the ideas of individuation is the idea of Alfred Adler. Now how we become our own person, individual, how we form our identity. So some of the more broad terms, I just kind of gave you the terms, and then some of the ones that are like super specific, like the France's looking chamber, I'll give you the person's name too, just because the idea with this is to kind of get you to, search around the internet a bit. If you're going to do a paper, give me some sources, like kind of normal references. If you're going to do, a lot of you have already done this, but if you're going to do like a podcast style or a video style, you can just give me like a Word document that has just a list of your references. I'm not too intense about that. Evolutionary developmental psych, tell me what that is about. Look into that a bit. What did Piaget think about the Socratic questioning? Right, so Socratic questioning, or like teaching through questions. I ask you about something, and then you tell me about it, and then I ask you what you meant by this, and how would this apply to this, and this, and this, and I kind of help you find a closer and closer way to articulate what you actually mean about how you feel about something. And that's what Socrates was famous for. And so that's what Socratic questioning means. It means using conversation, but specifically specific questions to help people better explain. You're telling me you feel hurt and abandoned. Well, what do you mean by those words? And then you start to tell me about it. And I'm kind of like, it's almost like, it's not therapy, because it's not designed for therapy necessarily for therapeutic. It's designed to help you best articulate what you mean. I'm not trying to play you in that scenario. I'm trying to help you play. I don't know, that was freestyled, not the greatest. But yeah, what did Piaget, the great developmental psychologist, maybe the greatest, have to say about that? Before, at the beginning, sorry, I'm going long with this. I don't have a timer going about. I'm gonna keep this quick, but I feel like I'm already getting rambly. Spearman's, and I just gave you a super long presentation. Spearman's two-factor theory. That's what I was saying about G factor, and this is related to intelligence. Magic number 7 and George A. Miller. I'll let you look into that if you find that interesting, why the human brain has such a pattern around 7, like even just with like phone numbers and stuff. It's like much easier for us to remember 7 things than 8, and why that is, and how that plays out in a million ways. The Ash conformity study, classic. You can talk about the Big 5 model. right? And how that's like had this incredible history of stability in psychology. It's like, besides IQ, maybe the most validated and replicated study. You could look at Nicholas Tinberg's 4 questions. And yes, I am Googling this mid, because I just forget what, oh, it'd be cooler if I could just tell you them. I know one's about evolution and one's about, this makes for a terrible video, sorry. Okay, so Tinberg's 4 questions, yeah. So he's this guy that suggested that if you're looking at something, like you wanted to look at the development of, say like eye-hand coordination, right? If you're trying to look at where things come from, you always have to look at function, like why is an animal or why is a person performing this behavior? Like what does it do? Function is sometimes called adaptation. You need to look at evolution or phenology, like where did that behavior come from? What's earlier examples or forms of that? Number 3, causation, what caused that behavior? And number 4, development, well, how is that behavior developed? So what's the behavior doing? Where does it come from? What caused it to come? And how did it develop throughout the lifespan? And he thought that you had to use that model to look at the development of any complex skill, right? So that it's, you can see how that has like a evolution or developmental psychology aspect to it. Where am I here? The Hawthorne effect, right? Do people act differently when they're watched? That's super interesting. Learned helplessness, I've talked about a little bit, but this is Seligman's, that like through repeated failures, people can learn that they can't improve their situation, and then they'll act that out. And in that earlier presentation on social determinants of health, I talked about this, but Seligman, yeah. And then Harry Harlow, it's a difficult topic. His surrogate mother experiments, what happens in these cases of extreme neglect. And in these examples, he used experimentation on monkeys, but he was very interested in how neglect affected things like human depression too. So that's a difficult one at a certain level. You'll find tons of information, but it's difficult because it's very much trauma related. The Good Samaritan experiment by Darley and Batson, or this idea of like, we all want to be good people. Why don't we help other people more than we do? The halo effect, like how when we think somebody's attractive, it shapes how we hear what they're saying. And if you look at that by Nisbet and DeCamp, the experiments on emotion by Shatner and Singer. So like that one where I thought if I just put like experiments on emotions, you might find a bunch of websites that have that kind of a title. So for ones that were a little more vague, I gave the specific names. The idea of cognitive dissonance, that's a classic one, especially these times where it's like you're being maybe asked or forced by your work or whatever to act or to say certain things, but you don't believe it. And it's like, well, what's the psychological cost of that incongruence or that lack of alignment between how you're living and what you truly believe? This is like Festinger's, especially his cognitive dissonance experiments. Lichner's and the idea of the developmental systems approach, how systems develop, super interesting. So that's basically all of them. So sorry that went longer than I meant, and I really struggled with automaticity. Automaticity, that's how you say it. It only took me 13 tries. Automaticity, yeah. So if I had an editing team, I'd get them to just put that automaticity in instead of that huge rant about how I couldn't say it. You know what it means, automatic. Things turning automatic. Right? And if you're going to do that question again, I want you to kind of struggle with that or deal with that topic of like, it's something that we always say, but like, what's that actually mean? All right. So developmental psychology is a discipline with deep roots in the history of psychological thought. In this assignment, each of you will be exploring a core concept from the broader discipline of psychology, from the angle of how the key concept can be applied in real and meaningful ways in our modern world. I hope these little videos explaining the assignment help. All right, that's due November 8th at 11:30. Next thing coming from me is going to be chapter 5. So after this, you'll have both the assignments. So each of the assignments are worth 25%, and then the 5 quizzes, which are each worth 10%. That's the other half of the mark, right? So far I've given out the 2 quizzes, and then there's 3 more. All right. I hope you're enjoying the class decently, and reach out if you need anything. All right, cheers.